Hello, my name is Jonas and I'm happy to give this presentation about basic reposing for you. Oh, and I managed to get some really annoying feedback sound. Is that from you, Snow? No, it's myself. Yeah, there we go. So the topic for today is basic reposing or a bit of posing. So that's how to make your miniature stand and be posed in an interesting way. I won't have myself in this really nice little corner as Lasse did, maybe for next year's. The agenda, what I will attempt to talk about for this session is basically this. I will give a short introduction on who I am and what this class is about, slightly more in-depth than that sentence at the start. So basic reposing and what makes a character pose interesting. A bit of theory and a few slides, and we'll look at a few pictures of mostly Games Workshop miniatures in their basic pose. And then finally we're gonna do a hands-on demo using some blood letters that I will cut up a bit and see if we can make them stand out a bit more than they're currently doing from like their default stances. So just briefly, who am I? I'm sort of 38. I'm working as a developer at a bank. Super interesting. I'm the guy in the left corner here in the left picture. I have two kids who occasionally join me for miniature painting. I've been painting miniature about 25 years now with multiple year-long gaps. And you can see my awesome station there in the bottom section. I got into the hobby through Warhammer Fantasy, and army painting is my main interest. I don't game anything, but I think it's really fun to build units and armies. So that's probably my main interest. And the second interest is conversion and reposing and modifying the miniatures to make them a bit more unique. So on the slide here is a small section on things I've been working on. The Tyrannid Warrior on the left is an entry for one of the painting contests at the SquidCon Discord. Just it's a standard miniature, but posed to stand slightly different. The bottom two guys are from Kingdom Death Monster, the board game. They had some heads and weapon swaps and some alternate poses. You can see the standard poses of these monopose figures to the right. And up to the right, you see a Toughest Girl of the Galaxy miniature from Raging Heroes. It's a super simple, it's an arm swap and a head swap, but it makes the miniature feel very different, I think. And the top middle miniature is a Plague Bearer from Games Workshop. It's slightly modified with some green stuff to the face and to the stomach, and also the pose is slightly modified. And I will be coming back to this exact miniature in a moment. So again, what is this class about, or this session? It's about reposing or posing, because when we're talking about plastic kits and these multi-part kits, it's sometimes, if you have ball joints, it's super easy to make them stand exactly how you want. So we're going to talk a bit on what makes a pose good or bad. So reposing and posing is obviously overlapping with conversion that Mitchie talked about in the last session. But here we're not focusing on alternate parts or mixing kits, but just having a standard kit and making it as interesting as possible. So basically taking the standard miniature on the left here and making it more like the one to the right, and why that is interesting. In the demo section, I will be doing some cutting and gluing and maybe some green stuffing, but we're not really focusing on the technical aspects, more of the, what should we call it, the aesthetics of what makes a pose interesting or not. So there's lots of resources for what makes a good pose good or bad. I think most of them comes from traditional media in like character art and drawings and posing. And it's I'm not an art guy, so the things I'm mentioning here is just my experience and what I could come up with as making a pose good or bad. And the first thing that's in this slide is story. So I think a good pose should tell a story in some way. It doesn't have to be dynamic or like extremely full of movement, but like looking at this miniature that's captured mid-pose, you should get a feeling of what it's currently doing. So the left image here, it's from a super classic Tyrannid warrior from the Games Workshop range. And I think it's pretty good pose. You can see that it's standing with the swords raised, and it's sort of not laughing, but making angry noises and like come get it. So I think the miniature is obviously it's quite dated now. I think it has a certain charm, but like the technical modeling of it shows its years. I guess this is from the late 80s or maybe early 90s. And the kit to the right, that's the current warriors, but they are also far over 20 years by now, I think. So looking at the warrior in the middle, that's the official Games Workshop box art, and it has this, what's it called, a Venom cannon, or I think it's a Venom cannon, this huge gun thing. And I think this is not a very good posing done by the builders, because it has this huge gun, but it's not really pointing at. You see that it's pointing slightly downwards. Of course, it could be in the middle of the step, but it's not super clear what's doing. And the top arms of this miniature has this scythe-like or knives, and it's sort of flailing with them, which would make sense if it's like in a close combat pose, but it also has this big gun, so I'm not quite sure what it's doing. So I cut it up into Photoshop on the image to the left. You can see that I basically raised the big gun, so it's pointing more forward and more in the direction of how it's looking. So that makes it feel more like a firing position. And then I just lowered the top arms to make them feel more relaxed, like it's not actually doing any flailing currently. And then finally I raised the leg a bit to makes it seem more interesting to me. I will come back to that also a bit on asymmetry in the miniature. So this, if I would, I have built multiple warriors, and I think their default poses tends to be a bit stiff and boring, but just moving the legs about a bit, I think it can make them much more interesting. But again, so story, it's obviously up to you what makes a good story or what you're trying to tell with your miniature. And if it's a wargaming miniature, if you're building a squad of 10 guys, then you won't be spending so much time on each of them. But when you're building multi-part kits, it's not more work to make them, to give it a few seconds of thought through what they're actually doing and if it makes sense. For example, if they do have a weapon of some kind, it often makes sense to have them look in the same direction. The second thing I thought about for making a good pose is twists and asymmetry. So you see the image to the left, it's from Raging Heroes. It's the Iron Empire, they are called. And it's a basic trooper, and it's just standing there. You see, it's not super dynamic, but I think Raging Heroes are really good at making good character poses, because it's just introducing some lines or twists into the models makes it much more interesting and like fluid. You see, I draw some very helpful lines here for the shoulders and the hips. You can see that they are not parallel. And she's having this directional movement to the left, and also looking that direction. Up to the right, we see two Space Marines, and on the right, it's a beautiful painted second edition box set miniature. And obviously, this one is super stiff because it's a single pose. What's it called? A monopose kit. Just it has the backpack and the bolter as two parts, and you push it together. Push fits is super easy to build. But this one, it's the paint job is good, but it's kind of boring. It's just standing there. It's totally symmetrical, and it's just looking forward. If you compare it to the intercessor on the left side of it, it's basically the same pose. It's a marine holding a bolter, but this one is much more interesting because it's more twists and more things happening. The bolter is pointing a bit downwards, and it's a bit of a movement. So just very small changes in the posing can make it big difference on like the general feel of the subject. Both of these are looking forward, but you can also introduce rotations at like the hip, so it's looking a bit to the right. And if you also, instead of having a face, chest, and legs in the forward direction, if you start twisting them about, you will generally get more interesting poses. We'll get back to that when we're looking at the blood leathers that I'm going to cut up a bit. The third thing that I thought about, the third and the fourth maybe, it's balance and silhouette. So balance is what I think it should make a bit of sense. For example, these two Kingdom Death miniatures on the right, they're holding these super huge swords. And the middle one, it's Kingdom Death lantern armor from the base game from many years ago. And you can see that it's raising the sword a bit over the head and shoulders. And it feels wrong with this large stone-like weapon, because you're not going to hold it like that. It would be, obviously, it's not realistic to have that kind of sword at all, but when it's raising it, then it feels like it's either picking it up or putting it down. So if it's in a resting pose, it makes more sense to have it resting on the shoulder, like it's doing on the right side. So this is a much more recent kit. This is from an upcoming kit, I think, so many years apart. Also worth mentioning is that the right kit from Kingdom Death, I think it's a monopose, so it can only be built like that, compared to the left one, which is a multipose. So obviously with heads and arms and weapons separate, then it's harder to have good poses from the book. It a bit more demands on the modeler to make it feels right. So that's balance for for swords, but also if you have a miniature that is moving, then you want it to have, it should feel like if it's moving, then it should be in the sense of direction, and it should not feel like it's falling over. And the other thing I thought about is silhouette. So that's the outline. If you take a black miniature on a white background, the silhouette will be the things that are visible, the border edges. And the reason I'm showing this plague beard that I built is because I think it's a bad silhouette. I think it's when I have it in my hand and rotate it, I think it's a really nice pose. It's sort of leaning back, a bit relaxed with the arm, and holding the weapon in front of itself. But it's a bad silhouette because from a photograph perspective, or when you're transforming it into a 2D picture, because it's hard to see all the details. In this case, because the weapon is in front of it, then it's hard to distinguish what it is. So it's a good silhouette, or a strong silhouette, if you can make the picture black and white. So I mean black as in pitch black, the entire miniature pitch black. And if you can still see how it's standing and what all the different parts are doing, then it's probably a good silhouette. So this one can definitely be improved. So what models are suitable for reposing? It's very common. It used to be very common to have these multi-part kits from Games Workshop with like arms, legs separate, torso. So they are super easy to pose like however you want them to. So it might not be quite valid to call it reposing, because you're just building it in one of many possible ways. But it depends a lot on how the kit is set up. For example, if it has ball joints or not. So the bloodletters that we'll be looking at, it has ball joints for the neck area, so the head can be posed in to look at whichever direction. So that's obviously not reposing, it would just be posing it. The arms, however, they are stuck in one way, so there we need to be a bit more creative to get them to look how we want to. On the other hand, monopose kits, like this Age of Sigmar, I forgot the name, Praetors, possibly. Monopose kits like this, they are typically really good poses just from the get-go. Like I think all of these three are really nice. But it's really hard to modify them from the standard. You can... it's not really hard. It's more of a challenge compared to a multi-part kit. Like, for example, these ones, you could, if you want to repose them, you might just completely cut off the arms and find other suitable arms. But it's, so they will be more, typically have a better pose from the start with, but be harder to repose. I'm just mentioning plastic kits here. It's the good thing with plastic is that it's easy to cut apart and you can bend it and it won't break. Metal is definitely hard. You need like proper sewing materials. So not recommending if you're just getting started. And the resin would be a bit in between. It's quite easy to cut, but it has a tendency to break sometimes. So I would definitely recommend plastic. If there's no questions to interrupt with, then we're launching into short hands-on. Yeah, please shoot. A mind stealer. Yeah, so that's definitely. I'm not technical enough to get a picture of that one on screen. Or am I? Yeah, so the hard thing, obviously, when you're cutting up a big plastic miniatures like that, and you need probably a bigger cutter than the regular small cutter. If you have a modeling saw, I do have one, I'm going to show it, but it's missing. No, it's not. If you have a saw like this one, then it's like it makes the cutting quite easy. But it will definitely be a bit of a challenge too. You would need more sculpting to make the parts fit, and it's harder to find alternate parts which are good from the get-go. But it also depends on how much detail you're destroying when cutting it up. For example, the Mind Stealer has all this fur on the neck, so if you cut off the head and then change it into a different direction, then you have to do quite a lot of modeling work to make it look nice again. I've actually been thinking to convert a Mind Stealer for some time, so I might get back to that question and with some more hands-on answer. Right, so again, these blood letters, they are composed of, they have the legs, let me see. Each leg is coming from in one part, and the torso, and then the arms are separate, and obviously the head. So it's, the arm joints are, let's see if it's visible. The arms are not, it doesn't have ball joints, so if you take an arm and place it, it will always have one pose. And I think these poses are generally quite bad. I'm not fan of how these looks. So it will, for example, this one will always, if you don't get creative, it will have the hand upwards and forward like this. And it's common in the kit. For some reason, they are always having the left hand up and about. So this first one is just a default pose, having the the sword sort of pointing forward and the arms stretching out. And it's sort of all of the miniature in this kit are standing in the same way. I think it's a really nice pose with the legs, but it will get a bit repetitive when you have an entire unit of 10, or if you're building an army with multiple units. So I think this one has, the sword is quite a nice position. It feels quite balanced if it's walking forward, and then having it in this direction, it sort of makes sense. These weapons are so oversized, so it will look a bit weird. They are demons, so they can get away with a bit of weird looks. But this is the default pose. So the only choice we really have for this one is how to place the head. So I guess apart from what I talked about, what makes a pose good, like the most important thing is just dry fit. So like just holding apart in different ways and see what makes sense. So in this case, it's super hard to see. I played around with this, trying to figure out how it should look, and I think all of the poses will look quite horrible. And the main reason for this is that it's holding up the left arm in front of it, like it's grabbing something. And like if it would be in some, again jumping back to story of a miniature, if it would be in up close and fighting, then it might trying to scratch your eyes out and like grabbing you by the throat or something. But if it would be that close, then it would probably try to chop you with the big sword. So in general, I think it's, for me, it doesn't make sense to have the arm posing like this. So for this one, I would like to have the arms more downwards, more like an L shape like this. So I glued this one together earlier today, and it took using super glue. And when building plastic kits, if you're using super glue, then it will be easy to break it apart again. The joint it won't look as good as with plastic, obviously, but in this case it's a feature to be able to break it. Oh, let's see if I can break it, because it has this sort of shape that it makes. If it's a flat shape, then it's easier to break apart. But because of this, because how it's made, let's see if you can break it without destroying it. No, it break. But that's totally fine. So you see it's breaking like this. And it sort of makes it more interesting actually to have it a bit upwards. But I'm going to try just break it off. And if you're really lucky like this, then you don't break it off all the way. Or if you're being careful and using your clippers, then you can sort of leave it hanging on a thread, because that makes it easier to play around and see how you want it. Or if it's snatching off, then you're back to dry fitting and seeing what makes sense. So for this one, I think just having it closer to the body will make it feel more natural. So because it used to be pointing upwards, now the shoulder is a bit much too raised. That's no problem at all. So I'm actually just going to glue it like this, close to the body, and then the important thing is to make sure that the general direction makes sense. Like if the arm is in roughly the correct position, I'm gonna slice away some parts of it. And this conversion work is obviously being facilitated because it's a demon. So when I slap on the green stuff, it's sort of a feature if it looks weird and demonic. So it's more work. If you're working with human, they will be smaller and have more human-like details. So definitely not as easy as compared to doing like orcs or chaos or anything that's mutated. So something like this. And I think for this demo we can just take a small chunk of green stuff, and I'm just gonna sort of swoosh it in place and see if it makes sense. So obviously the shape is wrong now because of the shoulder, but what I'm looking for is to get the arm in the correct position. So if the shoulder is too far away, then I can just cut it off later. But it's not quite what I had in mind. So let's just try to bring it up a bit. And you can try lots of different things, like how would it feel if it has the hand more inwards? I think that's sort of good. Yeah, but what we're gonna do here is to remove the shoulder because it looks wonky, super wonky. So I'm just gonna be bold and use the clippers and then simply get rid of it. And then we're building a new shoulder from green stuff instead. Yeah, and okay, so I'm realizing this arm is sort of having a 90-degree angle. But maybe something like, yeah, something like this is good. So now it's more, because it's not a super huge change to how it was from the start. It used to have the arm stretching forward, and now it's more hanging down. So it feels more like a relaxed walking forward pose. So let's see if we can smooth this out just a tiny bit. So, but it doesn't have to be perfect at this stage. The important thing is just to get the general shape right, to have it in the right position. So I will build it like this, and then I will let the green stuff cure, and then I can come back and remove the parts that are not supposed to be there. Let's see if we can smash on the head also. So the heads are, I'm not a big fan of them. It's the eyes makes it looks a bit too human. So just because we're cutting things up, let's remove the face from it. The plague bears I built, I removed all the eyes from them. I think was a huge improvement. So that's what I want to do with these blood letters also. So this might seem a bit reckless and not completely thought through, and that's probably true, but you have to be a bit bold when converting and see what happens. I really like the shape of these heads. They are sort of like this long, super tall, going backwards, like the xenomorph aliens. And those are sort of have no visible eyes, which I think is a really nice touch. It makes it feel very alien, which is fitting for an alien, obviously, but I think it's also fitting for a demon. And typically when I'm doing this work, I would use sprue glue, like Michi mentioned, or plastic glue. But just for this session, I'm just taking a piece of green stuff to slide it in, because then we can play around with the posing and see if it's something that we like. So now I have it looking slightly, because it's sort of in a walking pose. The sword is just having by its side and the arm is relaxed, sort of moving forward, and it's scanning the battlefield for something to look at. So that for me it makes sense then. It's not looking straight ahead, but it's looking a bit to its left, or looking, because it doesn't have any eyes anymore. But I think this will make a much more good. It's much more interesting pose to me than how it originally was. So let's call this one. It's not done, obviously, because I've had it in the general pose. But what I need to do before it's done is to cut away some of the green stuff, and I will also add in some details to make it more blend better with the skin. But I think the best tip for doing green stuff work is to not be in a rush, because it's build it up in layers and like get the foundation working first, and then add more details as you go. So when working at this reposing, it's good to have lots of miniatures going at the same time, so you can glue them and let the glue dry, or you can sculpt new parts or build it up slowly, and suddenly you have the entire scene going. So let's leave this one here and hope we don't destroy it. So here's just the second guy. It has the legs and the torso, and I have a pair of arms here. So what I was thinking is that, like, I wanted to introduce a twist here. So instead of just having it walk forward, I want to change it so it's looking at some direction. And what I'm going to do is just use my clippers, and I will make a big cut in the side of it. Schmuck. One there and one in the other side. And it's good. It's much easier if you don't cut it completely in half. A bit more. I will also remove a bit of, like if you would chop down some lumber to make it a bit easier to work with. If someone has played the game Dead Space, it has this creature called Necromorph, which is sort of a space zombie that's infecting living things. And I think that they are super creepy with tentacles and body horror going on. And I think they're super good inspiration for building demons. Not quite there. More cutting. So some miniatures have a ball joint between the torso and the legs, and obviously that makes this kind of rotation easier. But not as fun, obviously. Oops. Now I broke off the leg, and that's because I glued it with super glue. So it can be both a good or a bad thing, depending. Right, so now it's sort of sort of standing. So in this case, I think it makes sense to have it standing a bit more upright. Or maybe twist more, not too much. Something like that. And it's not a huge, as I said earlier, if you compare it to this one, it's not a huge difference. It's just standing more upright and looking a bit to one side. And as you might have figured out by now, I don't really have a plan. I would just often start from the ground up, like building the arms, the legs and the torso like this. So if I have it standing more upstanding, more upright, then obviously that will affect the rest of the miniature. So that could make life easier or harder depending on what other pieces we have available. So I have 2 arms picked out here, and because these are not ball joints, so the arms will just fit in one way. So that means that it might I might have worsened my situation here. I have the good thing would probably be to just scan the entire kit and find the most suitable parts to start with, to not make, because there might be some arms that will look just right for this new position. But that would require some planning ahead, and we're not doing that today. So as you see, I'm just basically smacked on some green stuff here, and it's super rough. I will clean up once it sets a bit. I will blend the details a bit more, but also I'm planning to have these ones quite rough. I will cover this up with rough paint job, with goo and tentacles. So let's call it a feature instead of a bug. Yeah, something like this. And then in this case, then you will probably have maybe have the head sort, because it has the twist in the torso, then it could get away with looking forward and still having it sort of interesting. But I think I will have it in a bit of a, or maybe it will look really much to the right. Let's see. So I'm gonna actually let this one cure first, and then get back to it later and adding on the arms, because it's often when you have green stuff that's not fully cured, if you're not careful, then you will obviously mess it up a bit. So it's easier to have this one finished and then continue in at least a few hours. Or if in this case I started with the green stuff. You could also start by gluing it with super glue and activator to have it in the pose you want. So for this one I will probably have the arms like something like this, a bit hesitant, or just like it's ready for something, having it a bit out from the body and then sort of waiting. This huge sword is the biggest issue, because it's not so many different poses that make sense for them. Like you could be in the middle of a swing, or you can carry it relaxed, but there are not so many different relaxed poses that's looking reasonable. Something like this would also look really good, having it pointing downwards and a bit further back. So it's a bit hard to see. But you just need to play around with some dry fitting. let's see. I think we have time for one last one. So I have two ideas. Either we can see if we can get the arms in a good way, or we can see if we can change the legs. I think changing the leg position is slightly more fun, so let's go with that. I think it's really hard to get good jumping or moving poses unless they are built from that to start with. So that would be my master class recommendation, like play around with simpler changes first before trying to get something to run, because it's really hard to get it feel like it's actually moving and not just standing tipped over. But it's having one. Okay, so this obviously they are standing on flat ground. Just raising one leg will it make it feel more dynamic, and it's quite easy change to make. So in this case, we would like to cut it off at the thigh. So let's just be wild and cut schmuck like that. And often, if you cut the legs at the thigh, then you can just sort of angle it. If you just angle it a bit, then it's not a hard change to do. The more you modify it, the less natural it will feel with how the muscles are positioned. So the first thing I will do after cutting it off is to clean up the edges, so they are a bit more rounded, and because often when you put it into a new position, then the edge will be visible in some way. So it's easier to cut away a bit of the edges, glue it or green stuff it into the new place, and then smooth it out. So there we go. And just a tip regarding basing is if you're building it like this, building the miniature separately, then you can pose the legs in like pretty much however you want. And then you need to build the base to match it. For example, using rocks or cork or bark or something to build it up to in a suitable way. So like the thigh is easy to have upwards, but in this case when we're it will be standing like this from the start, but when we're raising it, then the foot will be in the wrong position. So to make up for that, we need to angle the foot a bit also. So either here at this place or a bit higher up, because these not very human looking legs will behave a bit differently. So let's see how far we can get. I just make a cut at the top part. Not sure if that was visible. It's cut here, and then I can sort of slightly bend it like that. And obviously you get a huge gap here that needs to be filled with green stuff. Let's ignore that for now. So, small piece of green stuff. And I will just put it into place and see how it will look like. And if you have any final questions, I'm happy to try my best to answer that. Right, so this looks super wonky. Let's see if, but something like like this. Yeah, so the top, the tie makes sense like this. But we will need to go back and make sure that the rest of the leg is fitting. But it's easy to start with. Start by in one place, for example, setting the tie in one place. And then if you see that the rest is not matching, then just cut it up and repose it as fitting. Right, that's it for basic reposing for this session. And if there's no questions, then I'm signing off now, and just big thank you for everyone that's been watching, and hope to see you in the next session as a viewer. Have a happy evening, everyone. Bye bye.